Doobie doobie doo. Doobie 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 doo. Doobie doobie doo. Doobie doobie doo. And here we are. It is Friday. Let's get rid of that picture. It is Friday. It is Friday with friends. It's 1 o'clock Eastern. And it's also 1 o'clock where Charlotte is because she's in Philadelphia. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my new friend, Charlotte Blake Alston. We don't know each other very well, but we know each other. And I'd say that we're very, very good colleagues. Yes. We're very good acquaintances. I think I can say that.
Absolutely.
We are alive. We are not dead. We have stayed alive. It has been a long week, Carl. It's been a nut crazy week. I think it's been a nut crazy fortnight. So, Charlotte, how are you doing?
I am here. You know, there's something to say that today. Seriously, I mean, I try to stay mindful of all that we've endured and the suffering that exists out there, and people who have experienced losses of loved ones. So I am grateful every morning my eyes open and I can draw a breath. So,
yeah. Do you have a mindfulness practice?
I wouldn't say I have a mindfulness practice. I tried that. I'm not good at practices. But
you just try to stay present then?
I try, yeah, just as how I move in the world, that I try to pay attention. I mean, I spent a couple of years really actually working on that, just working on paying attention. Knowing where I just put something down 5 minutes ago, you know, so I don't spend an hour.
Right. Where are those keys again?
Like I just had it in my hand, but yeah, I'm just trying to be. It just drives me nuts. But really, yeah, literally trying to be present, trying to be aware of what's going on in the world and where I am in relation to those things. There's, I used to carry, I had a little necklace with a pouch at the end of it, a little leather pouch, and tiny little sayings on little rolled up pieces of paper. And those are in the early days when I was flying everywhere in the 90s, I guess. And just observing the way travelers treat the people who are the employees of the airline. If there's a storm, the plane is delayed. This guy was yelling at this, my wife's meeting me at them. I'm like, and one time it was a part. They needed a part. You'd rather go in an airplane that's missing a part, and maybe not get there than get there alive. And so I found this little quote that says, "Be kind. Everyone is fighting some battle." So I don't know what burdens people are carrying when I meet them face to face. So the first order of business for me in the midst of all that we've endured since the spring really is a line that's often associated with the Hippocratic Oath, but it actually is not part of the Hippocratic Oath, and that is first, do no harm. So you know, even with we're all feeling emotions and we're all feeling intense emotions, but we don't need to add fuel to that fire. And even if it's coming at you with fire, and sometimes fires need to be tended to, but sometimes there are ways you can make the choice to cool some of those flames. So if it means going somewhere in a room, shutting the door and, you know, screaming for about 5 minutes and then coming back out, taking a few breaths. But first, do no harm, or first, don't add anything additional to the harm that's going to.
I know, right? And sometimes, I mean, I'm in a much better place than I was 15, 20 years ago. And I actually had, I was going through some old stuff and I found this like luggage tag. It was just one of those old fashioned manila ones with a bit of string on it.
Yeah.
And I had it dangling. I wrote "Be kind" on it, both sides.
Yeah.
And I had it dangling from my rear view mirror in my car because I was starting to get really agitated at the way some people drove. And I was like, you don't know what kind of day that they're having, right? You don't know if they've lost something or someone in their life, or they've got to be somewhere because a kid is sick at school.
Exactly.
Just chill the heck out and let them go, right?
It's the front plate on my car. It's "Be kind," and I can't tell you the kind of reaction that it gets from parking attendants, and just people. If I'm sitting at a light and somebody crossing the street and seeing, and they'll make a comment about it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I should get a license plate that says "Be funky." That'll put some smiles on people's faces.
Speaking of driving, I mean, when I turned 71, I treated myself to.
You never did.
Yeah, I don't know how. I was just 39 a few months ago, but
There you go. We'll stick with that.
I treated myself to a red convertible Beetle with a black convertible top, and it's been hit 3 times since the lockdown.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, so there was this one time. I mean, the last one was just a nudge, just a couple of days ago. The last hit, the real big hit, it was in the shop for 42 days.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah, so thankfully the left front tire took the bulk of the impact, but it just destroyed the suspension. So the whole suspension had to be rebuilt. And this is like my baby boomer nostalgia car, basically.
Yeah.
Because when my ex and I split, we had a 72 Super Beetle with a roof rack. Thank you very much. And so when we split, it was like the Beetle or the Kid. It's like, I'll take the Kid. So
that's a hard choice, though, especially with the roof rack.
You understand? It took me a minute, but I did want to go and it was hit by a truck. He clipped the rear of the car in the left lane. He was crossing the street, coming across. He had already come across 2 lanes, and now was in our eastbound lane. So he clipped the lane in the left lane in the rear and kept coming and hit me in the right lane. So she and I conspired at one point because he didn't have a valid U.S. driver's license. He had a U.K. driver's license from Ireland, so we conspired since we had his address to go to his house and beat him up. And my niece said that she would take off her earrings and and go with us, but we ended up just having some tea together. So
I think that's a much better idea.
Not him, yeah. She and I decided to.
Yeah. And you said he had an Irish license?
Yeah, I'm not going to say his last name, but
we don't need to do that.
Because he also didn't have insurance, and then the officer, the other woman was really funny because I couldn't get out of my car until he backed off of it, and then so people helped me pull over to the curb, and then she's on the phone, and we're standing on the sidewalk, and she had already called the police. She said, "The woman can't get out of her car. You have to come here quickly." And she hung up, and she says, "You have to be dramatic, or they won't come." So. Well, she and I have become friends. She's a real estate agent downtown. But,
no way. That's so funny.
But, she, where was I going with that? I don't even, the police officer told him that he had to produce some proof of insurance, whether he called whoever owned the truck. He was not the owner of the truck. But the owner of the truck had the same last name. The driver and the owner had the same address. So what we conclude or assume is that he's here working for his family here on this side of the pond.
Right.
So he was coming off. It's an area. It's a big 4-lane street in South Philadelphia, but it's an area where there's a lot of construction supply places. So he was coming off of one of those lots on the opposite side of the street. And then later we find out that I heard from his insurance company that he told them that we hit him. But oops. There was security camera that caught the whole thing. So
nice.
And yeah.
So
but
did he...
I said all that to say, I'm hoping to get a front plate that just says "Oh Ladybug."
There you go. So I used to have a '68 red VW Beetle. Oh. And it was a flat screen, and I loved that car. And the license. So in America, in England, when you sell your car, the car comes with a license plate. You don't keep the license plate. And so the license plate that came with it was NOX. I can't remember the numbers, but 3 numbers, and then whatever letter it was for the year if it had that. And there was a TV show long time ago called Opportunity Knocks. So I was like, all right, this car is going to be called Opportunity. So I had Opportunity written. I had this guy do these like really cool stencil to put over the back of the car, and I love that car. When it worked, I loved that car.
It worked.
Yes, when it worked, it was quite troublesome and very noisy.
Well, you ever had instances where somebody had to push you down a hill so you could pop the clutch to get it started?
No, I never had to do that. But what did happen was the oil pump, because it's an oil cooled engine, right? Mm-hmm. Is that right? No, it's air cooled.
Air cooled.
But it has an oil pump in it. Well, the oil pump broke, and I'm like, there's black smoke coming out of the car, right, out the back, and I'm like, what the heck? And I'm on the highway, right, and I got to get the car off the highway. So there's a junction coming right up, so I swing down. I'm in America now, so I swing down that way, and I get to and it's a big one of those spaghetti junctions, lots of exits and on ramps and all that kind of stuff. And the car is rolling downhill, going slower and slower and slower as I coming off the off ramp, and I just get it off up onto the green of this side of the road, and then it just stops. Right, and I'm just like, the engine seized.
That's it.
This is not going to be cheap. And so yeah, that was I ended up selling it because I just couldn't afford it at the time to get that engine unseized. But it was kind of my love-hate relationship of the time.
It makes me think you can probably do a whole hour or more of just storyteller travel stories.
Well, I could. There's more to that story, which involves a certain substance, but we're not going to get into that online.
Children watching, so
There may be children watching. Yes. There were, but it's and that was a long time ago in my history as well. Like I said, it was part. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because you're not just a storyteller, you're also a musician, right? You play.
Of sorts. Yeah, I don't promote myself necessarily as a professional musician.
I know that, but I heard on the grapevine.
Yeah, music is part of what the way in which I present my storytelling, as you know. But it's the influence of both parents, and we grew up in what I call a musical household. So my mother played piano and played pipe organ. She was the organist.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm in a memoir writing group yesterday, and yesterday the prompt was about writing about our mothers and who were they as children and what are the things they did. And she probably started studying as an adolescent, because I have a program from 1935, Young People's Day at the church, at Holy Trinity Baptist Church in South Philly, and it has Carrie Collins at the console. So she was playing the organ. So 1935, she would have been just shy of 17 years old, the date that happened. So she was already playing organ as a teenager.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
By the way, they call it a console.
Yes, the console is just the whole, you've got double keyboards, you've got stops, so all of the, and the pedals, the foot pedals.
Yeah. And it probably did it curve around? Do you know what it looked like?
It did curve around some. It was up. Our choir loft was up above the sanctuary.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
So the thing for us though, her kids, was that there was a mirror, so she could turn the mirror down just to see what was going on in the service to know when to play at certain time. But it also meant she could see us and what we were doing, so spinning fans or whatever we were doing, and to get the evil eye from her. But it was in our church. It was above us with the pipes, but. So you started taking, I think she wanted all of us to be immersed in music and the arts. And so you started learning how to play piano somewhere around 6, soon after you started learning how to read. So if you could read letters and associate those with sounds and put those together to make a word, you can learn to read notes and associate
right.
Sound as well. So the music teacher came to our house, Mr. Roberts. I think half of his income came from the Blake family, but it was... that's the lineup of the Blakes.
How many were there in your family? Kids?
There were five kids.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then when you got to be a certain age, you could choose a different instrument if you wanted to, and everybody except me did that. I actually, when I was young, I was a really physical kid. I ran everywhere.
I can see that.
And if my mother was in the middle of making something and was missing an ingredient, she would send me to the store. Because I'd run all the way and get what she needed and run all the way back. My brothers would stop and talk to people. So dance was really what I wanted to do. That's kind of how I manifested my artistic expression back then. I was a 3-sport athlete, and dance in many ways to me was just another form of athletic expression, to defy gravity for a moment in time and make it look effortless. It was like a real high. But we would do family programs. We'd sing. We had this signature song that we sang as kids that my dad recorded on those old reel-to-reel, those big reel-to-reel.
Yeah. So my brother, he just came here in England, The goldfinch, it's yeah. I won't get into that, but we are blood brothers. I changed my name because the FBI wouldn't know who I was when I first came over. Anyway, that's not true. So my brother and I, we had a Grundig reel-to-reel tape. Well, it's our stepfather's, but we would use that and play with it all the time. We loved it. Yeah. Anyway, so you used to record
her choir concerts, and he would record us in these concerts. And it took me years before I found someone who was able to get the music off of it. Everybody had already thrown away that old equipment they didn't have. One guy, he had to bake it in the oven and all. So I finally found someone. He said, I was just about to throw that machine away. I'm like, don't do that. And I'll be darned. And I didn't realize it recorded on both sides. And so he stuck that thing on there and fast forward. And sure enough, one of those, there were the Blake children singing their signature song, I Am a Fine Musician. But my father, Did
you have that? You have that digitally saved now?
Yes, I have it on an MP3. We're on MP3, and I have it on CD-ROM. Yeah, so I sent it to all my siblings' children so they can hear. Your dad is the tuba. Yeah. So
that's so cool.
But yeah, that was. I told him. I said, you don't know what a gift this is. But it also, I think there's also one of those, I believe, is my grandmother's voice also. My grandmother loved to sing. She sang in the gospel choir at the church and the senior choir. She sang in both choirs. But she also sang solos. And I think from the flourishes, that was kind of my mother's style. I think it's my mother accompanying her as well, singing some hymns. So he was able to capture that. What I was actually looking for was a recording of my spoken word voice as a kid. My father wrote these pieces for me, and I started standing up in front of people when I was about 6 or 7 years old. So that's what I was looking for. I didn't find that, but that gem of a clip of us as children singing was just such a great gift. But so my dad really was not musical. He did play the radio. He had, we used to tell him, like, could you just...
Did he also play the Victrola behind you?
He played that was in my grandmother's living room, this Victrola, which still works, by the way, boys and girls. So there are 30, I'm not going to take out the 78s. I was showing...
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
One fell out and I broke it. But yeah, it still works. So that, and it's heavy as all get out. It took 3 guys a few inches at a time to get it in here. So I'm not sure.
Really? Wow.
But yeah, the lid pops up and it's authentic. And as I went to a whole website to see how you determine whether or not what you have is authentic, because there were a lot of knockoffs during that period. You have to go to the back of it and look for a specific type of label on that. So it is authentic. So, there's a knob missing on the top cabinet and it's got some scratches in it. But other than that, it still works fine. But my dad was the language guy. My dad earned his living as a mailman, but so I always say that he literally and figuratively carried a wife and 5 kids on his back. So they married in 1944, but my mother did not have a full-time job as a married woman until the early 60s. So my father really carried us, but he always, and that's a whole story unto itself, because he was much more than a mailman to his clients. He used to even go visit them on his days off and check on some of his elderly clients. But he would carve out time, which is something that I've always struggled with, consistently to write. And so after the dinner dishes were washed and he watched the news, read the paper, that was his ritual, he would often disappear upstairs in my parents' bedroom so he could have some quiet time to write. So, the door was closed, which means keep out. But, I was a daddy's girl, so I just followed him everywhere. And I would just go in. I would just sit on the floor.
Were you the youngest?
No, I'm smack in the middle. I'm in the middle.
Okay, all right.
But I knew that was his quiet time, so I didn't talk. I didn't ask him any questions. And I would just sit on the floor. Sometimes I took a book, or sometimes I would just sit there. And he'd be on the bed, propped up on pillows, and his legs were bent, his thighs were his desk, and papers and books around. And so over time, he started reading out loud little passages of what he was reading. So I was hearing the language and the words, the poetry, the work of Gwendolyn Brooks and Langston Hughes.
Oh, wow, nice.
I did a podcast a few weeks ago for a couple in Virginia, Corey and Laquita Staten, and I showed this book that he gave to me, and several people put in the notes that they had it. Sheila Arnold was one of them. So this, I don't carry it around anymore at all. It kind of sits on my shelf. downstairs, kind of wrapped up, but it's the complete poems of African American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. And
Ooh.
you can see some of the pages have already separated from the binding, but so he selected a poem for me to read. And what Dunbar is best known for are the pieces that he wrote in what's referred to as Negro or African American dialect. That's not the only poetic form in which he wrote, but that's what he's best known for. And that essentially was, the evolved language style of speaking of people who were brought here with their own languages, their own articulation patterns, their own structures, and, met with English. So nobody was taken off the hulls of slave ships and said, "Oh, now we're going to sit down and talk about English structure and grammar." So they, and if, whatever your mother tongue is, when you speak a second language, you often apply that articulation pattern.
Right.
So,
And the syntax as well.
Exactly. You're so like you're from India. You come from a country. You speak English, you still apply your articulation pattern. So that's essentially what happened. If it's French or something, that's very romantic. But it still was it's an oral language, an oral dialect. So how do you represent that in writing? How do you, if you say, "Come here, children, sit down," how do you spell that? How do you spell churn? So Joel Chandler Harris made choices, which to me are really exaggerated forms of the dialect. But Paul Laurence Dunbar's dialect, even as his choices of spellings and phrasings, even as a child, I had no difficulty reading it because what I looked at on the page sounded in my head like the language, the articulation pattern, and the melody and the rhythm of my great aunts and uncles from Virginia.
Oh, wow.
So the poem that he gave me, I read it over and over, and I memorized it. And I think when he saw how quickly I memorized it, a little light bulb went on, and that's when he started writing these little comedic monologues for me to do and give me other poems to read as well. Nice. Not all the African works. I mean, like Casey at the Bat was one of them, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
But I only have 2 photos of myself. I think I posted one of them recently on Facebook, reciting. And in the black church, if they find out that the children can do anything at all, play the pinana, sing, you will find yourself on a program. So they're going to encourage that gift that you have or that talent. So you would find yourself on a program. So I ended up doing what I call the church banquet and tea circuit. I'd be on the program. We now have a reading by Miss Charlotte Blake. But those 2 photos, they were both done on Polaroids. And if you look at them, you can see they were both pulled off too soon because there's streaks in them. But I know exactly what I'm saying based upon my body language because of how my dad coached me through each one of those pieces that I would do, whether it was the poem.
That's so cool. I love that.
So whether it was, emphasis on a certain word or phrasing or pause for laughter, whatever it was, or a gesture, all of that, he coached. And there was one time when we were in the program was in the equivalent of I think it was a gymnasium. It was like the YWC. We still had YWCAs back then. The Young Women's Christian Association.
Right.
And so, you're in a gym. You know what that's like when you perform. The sound's bouncing all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
It's
terrible, yeah.
I was maybe 10 or 11, and I thought to myself, oh, well, the sound is just bouncing all over. I don't really need to talk very loud. So I got in front of them when they called my name. And so I basically spoke. I didn't really project very much because the sound was going to bounce around. And I went to back to sit down, and he leaned over and he said, "You stink." Like, couldn't you see that the only people who were laughing were the people on the first 2 rows? So that was my lesson in projecting.
Yeah.
At that point. But so that's really where the seeds.
That's funny.
For what I'm doing now were planted. Really there. There's a piece that I do called Pearls at the Foot of the Bed, and that's really what it was. I mean, he fed me the treasures and the jewels that came out of our writers and our poets, our authors. So that's where it happened. And and anywhere I went to recite, we were buddies. He took me there.
That's so cool.
In fact, there was one time when I was thinking maybe 11 or 12 when all of this was beneath me. That he asked about doing a program. I said, no, I don't want to do anything. He said, well, we can just go. We'll just go to the banquet, see who else is on the program. I said, all right, well, I'll go with you. And then I'm sitting. He says, well, they see you sitting here, and they know that you recite. Somebody might call on you to do it. Even if you're not in the program. I said, I'm not going in. He said, well, you never know. People see you sitting here. 2 seconds later, we'll now have a reading by Miss. He didn't even look at me.
That is too funny. So you got your timing then, and the musical side from your mother, and then you got the wordsmithing from your father, and the memory thing as well. That's so cool.
All of that would come full circle much later on. The first time I had to narrate something with the Philadelphia Orchestra, they gave me a score. So I'm the only one of my siblings that really did not continue to pursue a course of study in music on some level or another. I stopped, taking lessons around 6th grade. I never really lost my ability to be able to read halfway. My reading is about a C plus. But I can still count, so I can tell the difference between.
Yeah. But can you count in time? Because some people can't count in time.
Yeah, the tricky thing is that, when you're working with music, it helps to have a good ear, because you can't talk in a normal pacing and be counting measures at the same time. So you have to have some auditory cues. But I think I fell on my knees in my dressing room and thanking my mother for forcing us to take piano lessons. And I tell kids all the time that, you never know what in your life is going to serve you later on in your life. So,
that's true. That's
that I've
very
done
true.
in my life has prepared me for this time in my life. The other was the fact that our parents exposed us to everything. Everything.
That's cool.
So, and after a certain age, I don't remember, but probably after elementary school, they started sending us to music school for lessons. So Mr. Roberts gave us the beginnings, and then that continued at Sonoma Music School in Philadelphia, which has branches. It's a historic music school here in the city, which has branches all over.
But did you go to the music school as well?
I did, but I took dance. I took dance class.
Okay.
My father kind of enrolled me in I don't know what it was, like dramatic speaking or something, and he sat in on the first class, and the teacher didn't really have control of the kids, and so that was it. He didn't move back to that. But that's pretty much what I did at Settlement. Was I took dance classes and did dance recitals, and that's what I wanted to do when I left high school. I mean, I wanted to go to New York and sit at the feet of Alan Ellie, and essentially my mother was like, "No young girl in her right mind would first of all go to the city of sin, and pursue something as frivolous as dance."
What do you mean by right mind?
Well, and you go to college, you get a degree, you get a real job. So that's what I did. I went to college and I got a real job. And then it was the kind of the storytelling piece actually kind of started sparking while I was teaching. You were about to say something there.
I was. But then you kept going, so I just sit back. See, what I really should do is just say go. I know we're very good at talking. It's wonderful. What I was going to say is your dad sounds like the guy who really wanted his children to get the best out of whatever was on offer for them, and that's that's really, really cool.
Both of our parents. I mean, back then, I don't know what it's like now, but when the orchestra was at the old Academy of Music, the grand old lady of Broad Street, the Academy was a former opera house. I mean, just beautiful chandeliers. They're in a different location now down the street, but the interior doesn't compare with the Academy. But students would be given free tickets to concerts, to orchestra concerts. Now, you'd be in the nosebleed section behind a pillar and a post, but you were still in the space where the concerts happened. A lot of people, there was a extraordinary virtuoso pianist named Natalie Hunderis, who lived in Philadelphia, toured all over the country, but twice a year, she would have a little recital in her house. So people in the community could come, and it was kind of like a tea, and you'd have your mints and your nuts and your canapes, your hors d'oeuvres. And she would play a free recital for the community.
That's cool.
We were exposed to just about everything. My brother, I guess it was 6th or 7th grade when he chose violin. Philadelphia back then had an enviable public school music program. And so he ended up in All City. My parents also used a cousin's address to get them into one of the best music schools, public schools in the city back then. This was in the 60s.
That's very mischievous. That is very rascally.
But yeah, and he ended up in All City Orchestra, and ended up eventually, after being a bit of a slack off, that he realized he needed to work a little harder, and became first violin, moved up, but and then later got a full scholarship, music scholarship, and later became one of a handful of jazz violinists in the world. But all of that, those seeds
Wow.
were planted once again when we were very, very young. So yeah, we were exposed to just about everything, really.
That's really cool.
The other
Now,
wonderful thing about my father, I'm sorry, this
that's,
just popped into my head.
well, you're
Um,
collecting stories about your father, right?
I, well, yeah, I'm collecting his
I mean,
stories.
you're
And
doing a
so,
lot of genealogy as well. I mean, that's something that you're really into, because I
yeah,
keep seeing these pictures pop up on Facebook,
yeah,
which are amazing pictures, by the way. I'm
yeah,
loving seeing
there's
them.
a lot of layers going on. So it was when I turned 70, it dawned on me that I was the age my father was when he left the planet. And this
Ah,
wave of guilt washed over me because I realized for 30 years I had put on the back burner, in a closet in the basement, the documentation of all of his short stories, essays, plays. He had a column in the community newspaper. We lived in a section of South Philadelphia called Point Breeze. His column was Breezing Around.
oh,
I
nice.
have copies of that. Um, this box, it kind of started with this, you know, finding the letters that they wrote to each other when my dad was in the service. So I have all the letters here. Uh, and in those letters, we found it was not till my son went to college, and he wasn't sure what he was going to do, um, and went in undecided. But then he discovered an aviation program at Norfolk State University that was administered in partnership with Hampton University. At classes at both colleges, and he was on the flight team. He discovered this aviation program. He went over and talked to the head of the department. Took a sample flight. I'm like, is it sample flight? You didn't take a flight, you do. But a whole new world opened for him, and he switched his major to aviation science. At that same time was when I was starting to go through some of the things that I had in the closet I pulled out of my mother's house and my grandmother's house. And that's when I discovered some of these letters and discovered my father's unique military service. So he was one of three. I have his picture on a wall in a different room, but his a class photo, 1944, where he was one of three African American men who were selected for this training in a class of 105 men. Uh,
Wow.
Radio operators mechanics course for the Army Air Force. There was no Air Force at that time. Air Force was
Right, right.
a few years later. But he was essentially a radio communication specialist on what my son believes. My son, once he saw one of these letters in particular, it sent him on a tear of research. So he thinks it's likely a B-29, which was the state-of-the-art bomber in 1944. They were trying to do the cleanup in the Pacific and then the European front at that time, or a B-24 bomber. But the B-29 was Boeing rolled those off out of their factories in 1944. But one of his letters. It's quite revealing. It's a limit to what you can put in a letter because you can't reveal your position. You can't,
Right, right.
before they get out. But the longest one on military issues, stationary, so it's like tablet size paper,
Hmm.
is 13 and a third pages, front and back. And every few paragraphs or so, he says, I know I'm writing a lot, honey, but I want you to know what I go through. So he graduated on April 14th, 1944, and probably was sent home on furlough because 11 days later, they got married. So April 25th, 1944 is when they got married. Full uniform. I pulled it out just in case. I posted it before online, but
I'm looking for it on Facebook, which if people are looking around saying, what is he doing? Because he's not paying attention. I am listening to you, but
look,
I am on Facebook looking for that photo
look
to
at
see
that
if I
head.
can, so I can, oh, that's a nice, I got to get, is this you and your mother? Hang on. Let
Is
me
it
just
me
quick,
or my mother? Yeah, I'm a reflection of her, pretty much. I don't
you
quite
are?
know how to angle this thing here.
Hang on. All right, let me get back here.
There we go.
Oh, that's nice. That's lovely. Look at that.
So that was just 11 days after he graduated from the program. So
That is so neat.
the question is there's very little written about integrated flight crews before the formal legal integration of the armed forces. There was no the armed forces were not integrated back then. So the
Right.
question is, how did he get selected for that? How did he end up in this program? So that started the research, and it's it was a line that he put in there that I didn't pay attention to, but because my son has aviation brain,
Hmm.
bam, he picked right up on it. But he recounts this experience of my son thinks it might have been a training flight, but there were 10 of them. They went through a storm. Uh, they were denied landing. The first base that they called, the pilot went up higher. They were being, buffeted around. They were denied landing a second time. And then he talks about the fact that he had left his oxygen in the tail. You're supposed to have all your stuff on you.
Yeah, yeah.
He had to crawl through some narrow space to get all the way to the rear of the plane to get his oxygen from the tail, crawl back through this narrow space, put his oxygen on. His guy's feet were getting cold. They were throwing up. And they finally got permission to land on a naval base in Fort Worth, Texas. And the line my son picked up on was, he's in the letter, he says, they told us that we had to move our big bomber by noon the next day. So it was a big bomber that my son, picked up on, and he started. It's been amazing. He and a colleague of his, works in airport operations at Atlanta Hartsfield Airport. So one of
Oh,
his other
cool.
colleagues, who's a big military history buff, has really helped a lot. I mean, they've uncovered all kinds of documents. They did a drive down to Tuskegee. They did a drive down to one of the old
Nice.
training bases to look in their files. His buddy Wes looked through, I don't know, a couple hours of microfiche and found my dad's name
Oof.
on one item. My eyes would have been crossed over by after about 5 or 10 minutes of looking at
Yeah,
microfiche.
mine too. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but
So,
yeah.
uh, so your son, has he? Are there any of these guys that are still around, or I'm assuming probably not.
Not likely. Not likely. I mean,
Yeah.
we still only have a few Tuskegee airmen left. I mean, one of them just recently passed of COVID. So it's really just a few of them left. And there's some research that I've been doing recently on women, African American women who served, and they are just now, all these years later, just now getting recognition for
Yeah.
what they did. I mean, and one of them, and they're in their 90s now, late 80s or 90s, and one of them, in an interview, she was asked, how she felt about being recognized and honored, and she was just, weeping
Yeah.
about what they did. But they're, first, nobody thought that they could contribute anything, of course, because they got,
Yeah. And we all know that's
brown epidermis.
rubbish. Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
and then eventually did, and they were, it was just one woman in particular that advocated, Charity Adams, who really advocated for the women to, they were trying to put them in these menial tasks of cleaning the floors and cooking and that sort of thing. But when they arrived in Europe and England,
Hmm.
they were taken to airplane hangars full of sacks piled up to the ceiling of undelivered mail that have been stacked up there for some of them for over a year because troops are moving from place to place
Yeah. Yeah.
on different fronts. So they had to come up with a system. Some of them had, they talked about the rats and the mice because
Oh yeah. Oh my
members
gosh.
sent cake, sent cookies,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, and the monumental task of having to sort through all of those. I mean, literally mountains of mail to get it to because mail meant morale,
Yeah.
and trying to determine which Bobby Smith was the right Bobby Smith, or
Yeah.
Bob Smith, or Robert Smith, or Rob Smith, Robbie. Some were addressed to John Doe, U.S. Army. And how do you determine who that is and how you get that person the mail? Or instances where, it was determined that that soldier had been killed and they had to send the mail back and notify the family. So that was quite extraordinary. And, a lot of those stories don't get told because, as in Hidden Figures, I mean, Hidden Figures was
Yeah. Yeah.
also a metaphor for how we're treated historically. That
Yeah.
if we're allowed to make a contribution of our intellect and creativity, then we don't want anybody to know.
Right. Right.
We hired you to
Yeah.
do it. It's that kind of thing. So though you can multiply those stories by thousands. But anyway, as my son's research led to um, the it's not Commemorative Air Force, and the Commemorative Air Force, which used to be once upon a time called the Confederate Air Force, the Commemorative Air Force restores a lot of these old vintage World War II planes and
Oh wow.
flies them around at air shows around the country. so you can purchase a seat. So I thought, you know what,
You can fly in one of them?
you can get on it. So I said, he's done all this
Wow.
research. I'm going to get him a ticket. I didn't tell him at first. So you could sit in this, the flight observer, which is right behind the co-pilot. There's flight navigator, engineer's position, and radio operator's position. So I didn't tell him at first, but I purchased the ticket for myself for the radio operator's position. But I didn't know I was going to fly. I don't, I can look at it from the ground and say, oh, isn't that wonderful? I don't need to get on it. I do not need to. So finally, when I told him that, he said, well, what are you afraid of? Do you think you're going to get a moat? I'm like, they're old planes, Jeffrey. So,
Right.
but even on the way up, it's funny. We took a video on the way up, and in the car, and he says, I'm on the way to my grandfather's. And I said, I'll let you know if I chicken out. And he says, she won't chicken out. She's going to fly. So, but even when I got there, I wasn't sure. But we boarded, and the old radio equipment is still there.
Wow.
And then behind me,
did you call anyone up?
I didn't touch a thing. Behind me was the tunnel that he referred to in that letter, crawling through that narrow space to get all the way to the back. So people could also buy tickets to be gunners in the back. So there were 10 people in the rear of the plane. So we did go to the rear, but it was after we landed, and then we walked around outside, climbed up into that section of the plane. But the only connection between the rear and the front was that tube. So we also flew with who was that?
Did you try to go through it? Did you ask if you could try to go through it?
No. It was a miracle that I got up into the cockpit area, so I was not pushing my luck. So, and they're testing each of the 4 engines individually, and you get all the vibration and everything. And the hatch was still up. I still could jump out. I could jump down the hatch, maybe. But we flew with.
That's a pretty big drop, though, isn't it? I imagine.
It's a bit of a drop, yeah. Well, the ladder was still there, and then they took the ladder.
Okay, all right.
Done,
No return.
So I said, if we die, it'll be your fault. But he's 102 now, but he was 100 years old. Bob Belcher, Lieutenant Bob Belcher, who was one of the first pilots to test the B-29. So he said we should just crawl in there and take a nap, if we had long flights across the water. But before we boarded, we were taken out to the plane. It's an all-volunteer crew. And they told their story of how they came to do this. And then they gave us time to tell our story. So most of us yielded the floor to Bob, because Bob talked about all of his experiences. But he took a pregnant breath just before we boarded, and we were able to talk about my dad's unique service. So there's that piece of it, the piecing together of his military service, and really his character. At the end of it, I didn't post that on YouTube, but I gave my son, I took my dad's dog tag to fly with, and then I gave him to my son afterwards. So at the airfield when we landed, because it was an air show, they had people who were doing dog tag duplicates. So I had a duplicate made. So I have the duplicates, but my son has the original because of all of the work that he has done. He's even created in his house a wall of honor. I mean, he's taken a lot of those old photos and framed them. So I've got, files, folders, and volumes of, my dad.
Oh, shoot. Hang on.
Essays and all of the, I can't leave the planet with them stuck on a shelf in the closet of the basement. So that's been my priority. The tough thing is people keep throwing me interesting projects that I say yes to. And 2 years after making this commitment, I've only done a little bit. So I made a commitment. I'm putting this out there, people. My friends laugh at me. You will all, storytellers who know me will laugh at me. But I said, I'm not accepting any major writing commissions for 2021. I said
because you're going to write this book, right?
Because every time I have to sequester myself in my sequestration to craft, to work on a writing project, which means I'm not working on this. And then another year, another chunk of sand moves through the hourglass of my own life. So there's that piece of it. The other is the other side of it. So there's my dad's stories. Short stories, essays, plays. He had a play produced on the radio. He was writing a novel also, 2, I believe. So a lot of those are in longhand, some in ink, which led to the other side of the paper because it was on really like tissue paper, thin paper. So a lot of the tedious part of it is discerning, trying to decipher what he was saying. I had actually hired someone, a friend of mine who was in one of my writing classes, to do a lot of the typing, and then COVID hit. So in a way, that's kind of been a gift because then I go through them. So I've found in some instances, and I didn't know they existed, 4 or 5 drafts. So what I've called together is what I call
Oh
the
wow.
daughter's cut. And the wonderful members of my writing group allowed me to present 2 of his manuscripts for review. So whatever tweaking, just very minor tweaking because it needs to be his story, his voice.
Right, right. Yeah,
So
yeah.
hopefully, even if it's just bound copies for family, I'd be happy with that. But you know,
So I'm
and
gonna put out to our listeners how many people who are watching this right now, who are listening to this right now, would be interested in buying a copy of the book. My cousin Nadine, she might.
your cousin.
I
So yeah,
know.
I can't, spend 6 months on massive writing projects. I'll never get to it. So that there's that piece. There's the other, my mother's side of the family, and that's our elder who is 92. My cousin Abigail turned 92 in August.
So there's 2
And
extra copies you need to print now.
keep me posted, Simon. It may grow to 5. Who knows? So Abigail at a family reunion. I can't remember. I'm horrible with, I'll say something happened 3 years ago, and I find it happened 8 years ago. But about
Yes.
7 years ago, so maybe it happened 10. She did the entire family history off the top of her head. And
Wow.
I remember saying to them, I mean, no notes. And I remember saying to my sister, we need to go down there, sit with her, and talk to her. She also is a member of her genealogy club, where she lives in a rural area of Virginia. You got to have a car. And she had put together a family tree that disappeared somehow at the end of the reunion. So we haven't recovered. So I'm trying to help Abigail recreate that family tree, but she
Oh
also
my
has
gosh.
narrative stories. So my son and I went down to see her 2 years ago, just before she turned 90. She's on land that has been in the family since pre-emancipation. We just
Oh
sold
my gosh.
quite a bit of it actually because she's the last sibling left and just can't keep up with the taxes. But
You got 2 or 3 of these, right?
I do
Voice
know I have got
recorders.
that, and I got iPad, iPod, and
Yeah.
iPhone and all that stuff. And my son took both still and video as well
Nice.
for her. But so I'm trying to help her recreate. The Ancestry.com has actually been really, really helpful with that. So it's both of those. My dad's military service, my dad's stories, my relationship, the story of my relationship with my dad, the
Uh
connection
huh.
that he made, the seeds that he planted in me, for the path that I'm on now. So that's all a part of it too. And then the other side, my mother's side of the family, where we're trying to trace that genealogy once again.
Wow. You really are into this stuff,
So that's what.
which
Well, when
that's
you put
so
something on the
cool.
back burner for 30 years, yeah, it becomes you have a strong
Yeah. Yeah.
urgency.
Right. And I think also the fact that your father sounds insanely amazing,
Quite,
and the family that you come from have quite a story to tell, especially if you've got these people that are living on, well, until
yeah,
recently, their own land for
yeah, and that's been interesting too because
so many generations.
try to do this research on the plantations, and I'm not going to name where it is in Virginia, but it's almost like plantations didn't exist, and you know that they did. Or
Hmm.
slavery didn't exist in Virginia, and you know it is. Like there's got to be some records somewhere. So I might have to just do a drive down, go to the courthouse or the historical society, and see what I can find. So we know that the ancestors we are tracing back to were born into slavery. They were my maternal grandfather's grandparents. He was raised by his grandparents, and actually the house that he was raised in, the wood frame structure he was raised in,
Hmm.
is behind what's now. She sold that portion of the land, but it's right behind the fence that had been her property for so long. So you'd have to cut away some stuff to see the whole thing, but it's still standing. She
Wow.
was born in that house, and the house she lives in now was a house that her father built and she moved into when she was 7 years old. But that piece is that structure, that house is still there that my grandfather was raised in. So there's all those stories, but I need to dig. I'm trying to dig a little bit deeper and put together a more
Yeah.
comprehensive picture.
Sometimes it's hard to find that stuff.
Yeah, it really is. But surprisingly, I did find some information. Actually, my maternal grandmother that I didn't know about. She didn't talk much about her mother. Her mother died. We don't know when. We don't know under what circumstances. They usually talked about her father. The father was loud, and that was why they were all loud, like the excuse. But we were able to find census records with her mother listed in the census, And then at the next census, he had been listed, her father was listed as a widower. But there was a birth 2 years prior to that. So we don't know if she died in childbirth, if she died later, if she caught something. We don't know. There are no records for that. So, we didn't even know her name at that point because they just, and it would have meant that my grandmother would have been somewhere between 8 and 10 years old. So she would not have had a lot of memories of her mother, a lot of stories to tell. Right. So just piecing that together. But like I said, Ancestry.com has been really helpful in that regard.
Yeah, my parents are starting to do, my dad is. My mum she chips away every once in a while, but my dad, he's trying to get into it. And my wife, Sarah, she's looking up her side of the family. And she did one of those DNA test things. Yeah. Which is also hooked into Ancestry.com. And all of a sudden she got like this email from this guy that was, I think it was in Germany. And we've connected all these people together now who are all part of her because part of her family's German. The heritage is German, and it's quite fascinating to find these connections and we have a copy of that picture too. Wow. This is like an old painting of one of the great grandparents who was a musician or composer. Sorry, not a musician. Well, probably a musician as well, but he was a composer. And what we thought were originally only 3 copies, there's actually 5 copies or something like that. And these other people have got it because Sarah was like, do you know anything about the history of this picture? Because we're trying to trace it. Right. And it's amazing. It's fascinating, all this stuff that's been popping up.
Yeah. I mean, even one of my grandfather's youngest brother, which I didn't know about. I mean, we used to know him as our uncle. But going through Ancestry.com, if this little thing popped up, there's another, Collins family tree. Would you like to look at that? I'm like, well, who else has it? And so it was not someone that I knew. I didn't recognize the name, but there was my uncle's name. And it turns out that he was the second after my grandfather's mother died. His father remarried, and so he was the offspring of that union. So he was their half brother. But but they didn't. They were siblings. I mean, we didn't know there was any difference.
As soon as you start to get half brothers and half sisters, it starts to get real complicated really quickly.
But it's just an interesting bit of information, and it also connects us to a whole other branch. The family. Yeah.
And they might have information and letters from right, which is always good. Yep. That's connection. What are you doing?
Usually good. Connection is
usually good. Right. So one of the things I want to talk about, because we've done 50 minutes already. We're flying through this hour. We do have a number of people that have said they want a copy of the book. And then Rachel Hedman said, share that pre-order link when it's together. So
which link? The book link?
the pre-buy book link. So maybe you should do that. Maybe you should do a little fundraiser or something, a little crowdfunding.
Well, I got to write it first, folks. I got to write it.
So. You do. But one of the other things I want to talk about, because you've been to Africa, right? You've been to Ghana.
I've been to Senegal, Gambia, Ghana, and South Africa.
So how was that?
Generally speaking, it was wonderful.
Did you pick it? Were you collecting stories at the time?
No. This was long before I knew there was such a thing as storytelling, living at it, or there was a storytelling. I was still teaching. I was a classroom teacher. But the first context in which I traveled was through a program here in Philadelphia that ran for about 26, 27 years called Operation Understanding. And it was created at a time when there was increasing tension between African American and Jewish communities across the country and here in the city. And 2 individuals, Bill Bray, who was a minister at that time, but also had been elected to Congress. He was majority whip in the Congress at that time. And George Ross, who was chairman of the American Jewish Committee in Philly, came together and said, how can we address this? It was a group that worked together during the civil rights movement. A lot of the lawyers went down and filed suit and helped out. So they came up with this idea for a program where they would immerse students from both communities in their respective cultures, but going back to their origins. So on the continent and then to Israel. So I went as a chaperone, later changed to group facilitator. It was a group facilitator for that. So we went to Senegal, Gambia for an immersion in the culture, and then to Israel for that. So that was the first thing. And what I noticed, immediately what you see is how warm the people are So, we in this country still continue to perpetuate the mythology that Africa is a country and everybody's starving and everybody speaks African. If something's going on in a city in Europe, you say the name of the city and the country. You don't say in Europe today, this happened. And if you see something about the continent, it's going to be about animals. So just how warm and welcoming and open the people were wherever we went, whether it was in urban areas like Dakar, the main city, or whether it was in more lush areas and villages in the southern portion of the Casamance regions.
Dakar's not a small city either, is it?
No, Dakar's not a small city. It's busy.
It's not.
And it's also like you can take the chaloupe, take the small boat across the water to Gray Island, where the slave castle is also. So that was the first context, and that it was just a wonderful experience. I mean, it stayed in my heart. One of the things that happened the second year that we went was there had been some border skirmishes with Senegal and its northern name, Mauritania. And at that time, in the 70s, 80s, there was a system of slavery actually in place in Mauritania, where it was largely, as happens in many places, the indigenous people who were the ones who were being oppressed. And there was an attempt to abolish that system, and there was some violence with people who ran across the border into Senegal. So there was a location where there were just hundreds and hundreds of people who were refugees. And so the woman who put together our itinerary at that point, Molly Melching, had decided that it might be a good experience for our students to go into this refugee camp and take things. There were children there. So this wasn't on our itinerary. I thought it was going to be a terrible experience. It was going to be a low point, and it was like the high point. We went to a store. We bought wiffle balls and bats and frisbees and Nerf footballs and bags of candy.
But weren't some of these refugee camps dangerous places to be, though?
Not at the time that we went there. It was.
Okay.
They were fairly new. They were actually in structures that were normally like grain warehouses is where people were staying. Okay. But when we got there, there were like hundreds of children, and they motioned for. We didn't know what was going on, but our guide motioned to us that he wanted us to sit down because they want to present you with a piece of theater. The children had prepared a skit for us. Nice. And after that, we thought, in our Western way of thinking, these children had nothing, and what they gave us was what the greatest gift you could ever give anybody, and that's yourself. People had taken off pieces of fabric to give them costumes. We didn't understand the language, but we knew what the skit was about. And after, we couldn't just leave. So I helped with my guide. He helped. I teach them. Did you feed my cow? Yes, ma'am. And I tell the story about that, and I say how the rest of the time kids kept coming up to me going, "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." And when I told my story, I ended by saying how the song was as treasured a gift as the candy, which was by then all gone. So that stayed with them, and it also stayed with me. But also, we had the opportunity in Ghana to go to the Ashanti region where Anansi was born, and hear Anansi's story after Anansi. I told Sami before we came on, I said, if I heard another Anansi story there in the village, I was going to step on the first spider I see. But it was absolutely wonderful, and to hear from the Ashanti people themselves, to kind of tell their history, the history of people who were walked all the way down to close to the slave castles there along the coast as well. South Africa was it was a small group of us actually, Judith Black, I'm trying to remember who else went, but it was a small group of us who went to the Women of the World Festival. And actually after we had flown...
Judith isn't there with you, is she?
Pardon? No, she's not.
You looked over to the side. I was just wondering if she was there. I was like, well, bring her on if she is.
Yeah. It's like 19 hours. We had to throw our suitcases down in the hotel, change our clothes, and run over to the theater to do a performance. But that was actually an absolutely wonderful experience as well. And we actually talked a lot about storytelling as a means of conveying that history. I went into the high school because this is post-apartheid. And that was a generation of kids who didn't live under it. And they acted like it was ancient history. They wanted to know if I knew Michael Jackson, But, and teachers were trying to say...
Well, I used to get, when I first came over to the States in the 80s, people would ask me, oh, there's a guy I know that lives in Scotland. Do you know them? And they give a name, and it's like, what?
Exactly.
No.
So let me, we're about to go off in 1 minute, but if you're able to tune into Monday evenings, Philadelphia.
Well, no. Wait. Sometimes we go over the hour, right?
Yeah, but not everybody. Yeah.
No, a lot of people actually do stay, which is kind of fun. So let's talk about. So when we started this conversation, what I was trying to lead to was Charlotte's work with the Philadelphia Orchestra, which she's been. How many years have you been doing it for now?
This particular concert, this will be my 18th consecutive year participation, but this is my 30th consecutive season as an independently contracted artist.
So yeah, Charlotte's been working with the Philadelphia. So I have to think about it because what comes out of my mouth naturally is the Philharmonic Orchestra, but it's the Philadelphia Orchestra in Philadelphia, funnily enough. And she's been working with them forever. And one of the things that she's been doing for the last 18 years is the Martin Luther King tribute. So how did that whole thing start, and how did you get involved in it?
I opened my big mouth.
Because it's on Monday. It's open on. It's your thing's on Monday.
And I had a conversation. It was an informal conversation. We were kind of backstage, back in a room before we were going to go out to do the preschool concerts, which I host. And somehow we were talking about that concert. I had attended those concerts, and I remember I work with a dance company, the Carolyn Dorfman Dance Company in New Jersey, and there's it's not that. It's a woman who I know, who knew my brother, who's a dancer, and she says when she attends a concert, she misses the dance. She looks for the dance and movement, and she was saying with me she sees dance when I perform, but I miss spoken word. And I said to them, and I was just making the comment. I said, what's missing for me is spoken word. I said, this is a concert devoted to a man who spoke words with passion and inspired not just people here in this country, but people around the world. And so I thought that an orchestra that allotted time for spoken word on a Halloween concert, they would invite an actor or whatever to read the Raven and do whatever they wanted on the second. If you're going to allot time for spoken word on a Halloween concert, you could maybe consider the possibility of the, adventure tonight, one include 2-3 minutes of spoken word on a concert devoted to a man who spoke word. That's what I said. I was just trying to make a point.
I was just saying.
I'm just saying. And then I got a phone call. So the first one I was asked to host, it was Bobby McFerrin who conducted. And I said, I have some pieces in my repertoire that I can do. So they allowed me to do that. And I remember at one point, because often, anytime you talk about spoken word, with music, with orchestra, you always get somebody, that's not going to fit. We're a music orchestra. And I remember exiting, and the person.
Toby the tuba, if you don't mind me saying so.
But children, it's okay for children. Children's concert.
Yeah.
On all the children's repertoire, but it's different when you're talking about adults. But I remember walking past, and the person who was concert master at the time just went, "Wow!" I mean, actually out loud as I was leaving the stage. So. I did that. The second year, guest conductor Thomas Wilkins, African-American conductor, incredible. You should Google Thomas Wilkins conductor, quite extraordinary. And so I get a call from the Philadelphia Orchestra, and they said, we have a guest conductor this year for the ML concert. We'd love for you to be part of it. I don't know if I hosted. I don't remember what I did, but they said he would like for you to speak the words of Dr. King over Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings. And if you haven't ever heard, I think you have heard it, you just didn't know you were listening to it. But if you haven't heard, Google Barber, Barber, not Barbara, Barber Adagio, and listen see if it doesn't move you to tears.
All right, hang on a second. I'm going to put that in the.
You have to host.
Spell it for me again.
B-A-R. Samuel Barber is a composer, musician-composer.
Samuel, all right.
Adagio for Strings. It's played often when heads of state have passed in Europe. It was practically the whole soundtrack of the movie Platoon. But you can't listen to that without getting emotional. And so I literally said out loud, normally I think stuff and don't say it, because I'm trying to be dignified. You want me to talk over the Adagio for Strings? I'll be run out of town on a rail. I could see the headline, Storyteller ruins Barber Adagio. But Thomas had crafted, it's not the full text, but he crafted excerpts and married them, paired them, synchronized them with that Adagio in such a way that it makes the presentation of both the words and music even more powerful. And he hits the crescendos in the music, hit right at the time when you're talking about the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. for every hill and every molehill. So it really is quite powerful, and often for me, it's it's a razor thin line between conveying the power and the emotion and the intention of King in this text and becoming emotional. Thank you. Yes. So there's some lines that trigger me emotionally. I have to go someplace else when I speak those lines. But if the text is synchronized with music, so this should be really interesting because I was recorded alone. The music has already been recorded by the orchestra, and so the tech folks have the task of synchronizing the two.
Wow, that's
how that's going to work out, and it's also, I think, going to be visually striking as well.
So I was, we were talking about this a little bit before we got online, before we started the show. But so I just assumed that you were actually going to be doing it live, but socially distanced. But you're not. It's all recorded. It's
been recorded.
Wow.
So I gave them a copy of my they had sent me a little teeny score way back in 2004, which I put notes in then. I don't even look at it anymore now because I go by ear and feel, and I adjust in real time as the orchestra adjusts in their pacing. So, but I sent them my notes to see if that hopefully that will help. But I'm looking forward to see how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, and for those of you who are left or are watching it at a later date, this is a link to that particular show on Monday to celebrate Martin Luther King.
It will be available through the 25th.
Okay, all right, all right. So actually, there's a lot of stuff going on the whole weekend.
There's a lot of
starting tomorrow.
Yeah, and by the way, I think there are also going to be interviews interspersed throughout the concert with a lot of Philadelphia's local community activists. Philadelphia still, as far as I know, has the largest Martin Luther King Day of service in the country. So that's all going to have to be handled differently. So I'm not sure how they're doing it. But then, yes, I've been sequestered in my sequestration, crafting a first for me, and that is a sound walk for Longwood Gardens, which is about 20 miles south of Philadelphia. It's a very well-known botanical gardens. It's had membership from members from all over the world. But this is also a first for them. So the idea was to take a look at the historical, at least that's the way I thought about it, as they initially approached me with this idea, the historical relationship between African Americans and American soil, the knowledge they brought with them of agriculture. So our first exposure to our lives in America was hands in the soil and tilling soil. So it looks at it through the lens of horticulture. So there are 10 locations throughout the gardens, both outdoors and 3 inside of the conservatory, where you will, when you get an idea, a concept for a project and think how you're going to frame it, and then you start doing the research and a lot of other stuff comes up. So this is an area that I had never explored before, African Americans and horticulture. So it turned up a lot of really interesting history. The challenge was to take a lot, I spent a week doing research, and now I had, 10 hours worth of material that I had to condense down into a 6-minute piece. But but it includes a piece on George Washington Carver, who was just a horticultural genius. Really.
This is at Lyndhurst, right? The Lyndhurst Mansion, is that right?
Longwood. L-O-N-G.
Longwood.
Yeah, Longwood. So it's not. I checked yesterday. They still have the Christmas stuff up, and that will be up, I think, through Sunday. And then, as I was told, the little elves descend overnight and do the transformation. So this is still like Christmas week. You've never been to Longwoods. I mean, I think you might be able to take a virtual tour, but it's quite incredible. So that will start next week and will run through March 22nd. So another bit of information I uncovered was a piece about Frederick Douglass, who purchased a property in D.C., which is now part of the National Park Service. But he named it Cedar Hill because of the preponderance of cedar trees on the property. But it was where he went to restore himself, to restore his spirit, to restore his soul. And there are all kinds of stories of people who would go visit him, and he would walk them around the grounds of his property. There's a reporter, a journalist from England, who talks about coming to spent some time with him, and he took her on a walk through the woods. Um,
Nice.
with all that he was doing, the traveling, the speaking, the fighting, the paper that he had, the North Star, all of the abolitionist activism that he was involved with, this is where he went to restore himself. It was years
Wow.
after he died that they even found in his some of the books in his library dried pressed flowers inside of those books. He had
Wow.
pictures and paintings of flowers on the walls. He built a one-room structure, an outbuilding with no windows, just a table, chair, paper, and pen. And there's a description of how the wisteria would sort of wind its way around the ceiling. But he
Wow.
found in the diversity of nature, the kind of acceptance you couldn't find in the diversity of humanity, of human beings. So
Yeah.
just a lot of interesting stories. That I think I took a 3-hour walk with staff late October. We just kind
Uh-huh.
of walked the grounds, to see if anything spoke to me. And one of them actually was this plant that I stopped in front of in the conservatory, and I thought, "What the heck is this?" And it turns out that it's the oldest. It's one of, if not the oldest plant, or considered to be the oldest plant on Earth. So it's been on
Wow.
Earth for tens of thousands of years, survived 5 ice ages, the appearance and disappearance of dinosaurs, shifting of continental plates. It just looked ancient to me. And I think I either used the word ancient or prehistoric. And it turns out that it is. But what was curious to me was I said, what is this? What is the name of it? It's called Woods, Wood apostrophe S, Woods cycad from South Africa. So if it's been on the earth for thousands, tens of thousands of years, what was its name before Mr. Wood
Mm-hmm.
discovered it, in 18 whatever? So that became a story too. But I also saw that as a metaphor for people who are survivors. So I
Yeah.
found an ancient Zulu creation myth, ironically, that asserts that the first form of life on Earth was a plant, and everything else evolved from that. So it's a real
Wow.
mix of history, a little biography, storytelling, even a little bit of singing. When we get to the water part, to the lake, I talk about the significance and symbolism of water, significance and symbolism of the woods to our people. So if you can't make it physically to Longwood because of COVID, you have to limit the number of people in the gardens at one time. So you do have to get reservations in advance. But
Is this
and
is
here in
this
September,
is there a link on your website to this?
my website is terribly not updated, but someone's about to update it. But if you go to visit Longwood Gardens, it's in Kennett Square,
Hang on.
Pennsylvania. But like I said, right
Long.
now, when I checked yesterday, it still wasn't up yet. It's still the Christmas stuff is still up. So might
Okay.
not be there until Monday or Tuesday. I think Monday is maybe just members or special visitors. I walked through Wednesday. So you have to have. It's like I was waiting for them to have a little box where I push the button. I'm from the old, CT days, but
It's
I have a toe in modern technology. So you need your phone fully charged, some earphones, and what you go to the visitor center, you'll get a physical map, but you also download the map on your phone. And all you
okay.
need to do is just tap on their number. So we'd like you to go in order, but you don't have to. People, it's a botanical gardens. People will wander as they want to wander. But when you
Yeah.
tap on the number for that location, then the audio comes up. You just click play on your phone.
Okay.
Um, so you'll get all of the stories that way. Or they will have an audio tour that should be up, I think, by the end of next week. And you can go online and do that.
I'm hoping there's only Longwood Gardens. I'm hoping that's the right one.
Yes, I hope there's only one Longwood, Longwood Gardens. Yeah, Kennett Square, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
so
So there it is. So, folks, thank you so much for those of you that stuck around. Thank you so much indeed. I really appreciate it, Charlotte. You are amazing. Listening to your story is just incredible. Your family story. We could do a 2-hour show just on that.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. At least by the sound of it. So thank you for joining me on this Friday with
Thank
Friends.
you. Thanks,
Thanks everyone
everybody.
for being. Yeah, we'll say goodbye. Thanks everyone. I'll be back next week. I'll let everybody know who our guest is. I can't. Well, actually, I'm going to let you know who it is right now because I can just pull up my calendar and do that. Next week is Gwenda Ledbetter, who is yes, yes.
Oh,
a tiny little coup, one might say. She is one of our true elders of community. She's been telling stories all of her life, I believe. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And we're in a lot of contact about the stories that she's going to share. So we're going to hear some stories from Gwenda Ledbetter next Friday. So please do join me. It's going to be phenomenal. Charlotte, your conversation with me today has also been phenomenal. Thanks so much for sharing your time and yourself and your family with us. I really appreciate it. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Love you.